The hum reaches her before anything else does, before light, before thought. Ellen Mullen lies with her cheek against the thin pillow and feels it come up through the mattress and the steel frame of the berth and into her own bones, a low, steady thrum that never once in 2 nights has paused or faltered, and by now, this second morning, it no longer feels like a sound at all. It feels like the ship's own pulse, and hers has begun, without her quite noticing, to slow itself to match it. She does not open her eyes right away. There is no need. The little cabin holds only the 4 of them, and she knows its shape entirely by feel and by ear. The upper berth above her own, where Thomas sleeps, close enough that she could reach up and lay a hand flat against the underside of his mattress if she wanted. The 2 narrow berths along the opposite wall, where Bridgie and Sean lie top to tail under one shared blanket, having given up somewhere in the night on staying at their separate ends of it. The washstand bolted to the wall with its white china jug and basin, the jug's water gone cold and still, the small electric bulb overhead, dark now, that had startled all 4 of them a little on the first night, the way it had leapt on at a touch with no match, no oil, no smell of anything burning. That smell is the thing she notices next, now that she is properly awake, or rather the absence of any smell she would call a smell at all, beyond a faint cleanness, paint and soap and starch, the particular scent of a room got ready for people rather than lived in by them for years before the people arrived. The walls are white enamel, painted so recently that Thomas had run his thumbnail along the seam near the door on the first night, only half believing it, and found no chip, no old grime worked into the corners, nothing but smooth, cool paint over steel. Even the blanket over her smells of nothing but itself, no other family's sleep folded into it, no damp, no turf smoke, and she had lain awake a good while on the first night, simply noticing that, the way a person notices a silence after years beside a clock that has finally stopped ticking. Outside the small round window, which Thomas calls the porthole in the careful voice of a man trying out a new word, there is no light yet, or only the barest suggestion of it, a gray no different in quality from the white-painted wall beside it. She judges the hour by feel more than by sight. Early yet, the deep part of the morning before the ship properly stirs, though under her the engines have clearly never stopped stirring at all, have gone on turning through the whole of the night, the way a mill wheel turns through the whole of a river's night, indifferent to sleep, indifferent to the dark. She lies a moment longer, listening to the ship the way she used to lie listening to the house in Mayo before first light, back when listening was how a woman took the measure of a day before she committed herself to it. There is the engine's hum, steady under everything. There is a creak somewhere above and behind her, wood or steel settling against the sea's small movement, though the movement itself is so slight this morning that she has to hold very still to feel it at all. A long, slow lean and release, gentle as a cradle rocked by someone who has almost, but not quite, stopped bothering to rock it. There is, further off, muffled by 2 walls and a stretch of corridor, a door easing shut once, and then no more. There is, somewhere below even that, a sound she cannot place exactly, a rush and a rhythm, water perhaps, moving along the hull the way a river moves along a bank, patient and enormous and entirely unhurried. She lifts her hand and touches the wall beside her berth just to feel it again, the cool smoothness of the paint, no roughness of old whitewash flaking under her palm the way it would have at home, and she thinks, not for the first time since Thursday, that she has never in her life slept in a bed so newly made as this one, on a ship so newly made as this one, and there is a kind of pleasure in it that she has not quite found the words for yet, even to herself. Everything aboard is new the way a thing is new only once, at its very beginning, before it has had the chance to be anything else. Above her, the upper berth gives a small groan of shifting weight, and she hears Thomas exhale the long, unhurried breath of a man who has decided, without quite deciding, that sleep has finished its work on him for the night. He does not speak yet. In their 9 years married, she has learned that her husband wakes the way a kettle comes to the boil, slowly from the bottom, with no sound at all, until quite suddenly there is a great deal of sound. Get up, she tells herself, though her body argues briefly and pleasantly against it, warm as it is under the blanket, the cabin still holding the last of the night's stored heat. But the bugle will come soon enough. She has learned its hour already from yesterday, though nobody has posted it anywhere she has seen. A steward simply walking the alleyways with the thing lifted to his mouth, playing a tune she does not know the name of, but which by tomorrow she suspects she will not need told twice. And there is a modest vanity in her that would rather be dressed and her hair pinned before that tune reaches their door than be caught still tousled in her nightclothes when Bridgie wakes and starts her questions. She swings her legs down and finds the floor with her stockinged feet, the linoleum cool but not cold, nothing like the flagstones at home that could take the warmth clean out of a body before it had properly stood up. She dresses in the near dark by memory, her good gray skirt and the blouse she washed out in the basin the evening before and hung to dry over the rail at the foot of her berth. Dry now, or near enough, with only a faint stiffness at the cuffs that will soften as the day goes on. She works quietly, an old habit from a house with thin walls and light sleepers, though here the walls are steel, and the sleepers, she has already discovered, sleep through a great deal more than they ever did at home, lulled, she thinks, by that same endless hum she woke to. Thomas swings down from the upper berth with the particular carefulness of a big man in a small space, one hand braced against the wall, and lands soft on his feet all the same, 36 years of farm work having taught him, if nothing else, how to put his weight down without announcing it to a room. "Good morning," he says, low, close to her ear, and there is something in his voice this second morning that was not quite there on the first, an ease settling in, the newness of the ship wearing down at the edges into something closer to comfort, the way a new pair of boots begins, by the second day, to feel less like someone else's boots and more like your own. They came aboard at Queenstown only the day before yesterday, though it feels already longer than that, the way travel stretches a short span of days into something with more rooms in it than the calendar strictly allows. She remembers the tender out from the quay, small and low against the great dark wall of the ship's side, and the crowd of them going up, and Bridgie's hand gripped so tight in her own that her knuckles had ached with it, and the moment she still turns it over sometimes in an idle hour, when she had first stood on the open deck and looked along the length of the thing and understood, properly understood for the first time, the scale of what they had agreed to cross an ocean inside of. Thomas washes at the basin, quick and quiet, the water gone cold overnight, but no colder than well water ever was, and shakes his hands dry because the towel is small and there is only the one before the wash is done for all four of them. He pulls his braces up over his shoulders and reaches for his good jacket, the one good jacket, kept folded with more care crossing the Atlantic than it had ever been kept folded in Mayo, because a man arriving in America wants, whatever else may be short, to arrive looking like a man who has something to arrive with. Bridgie stirs next, 9 years old, and sleeping the deep, unbothered sleep of a child who has decided the ship is, on the whole, a marvelous thing and has stopped worrying about it accordingly. She surfaces slowly, blinking at the low bulb her father has now switched on, its light flat and steady, and requiring no match, no wick trimmed, nothing but the small brass switch by the door that she herself discovered on the first evening, and has flicked on and off perhaps a dozen times since, out of simple wonder. "Is it morning?" she asks, though the porthole answers the question for her better than either parent could, showing now a thin true gray where before there had been none. "It is, love," Ellen tells her, and begins gently working Seon's shoulder, 5 years old and buried so far under the blanket that only a fistful of dark hair shows above its edge, until he surfaces with the particular outrage of a small boy who feels, on principle, that mornings arrive too soon regardless of the hour they choose. Above them all, faint but drawing nearer, though none of the four has caught it yet over the ship's own steady hum, a bugle has begun somewhere along the deck below, working its way forward through the alleyways, calling the ship's third-class cabin by cabin, corridor by corridor, toward the first proper meal of the day. The tune finds their door a few minutes later, closer now, brassy and cheerful and slightly muffled by the steel between. A steward passing along the corridor with the instrument lifted and his cap set back on his head, playing the same 6 or 8 bars Ellen half remembers from yesterday without ever having learned to hum them properly herself. Bridgie is out of her berth at the first note, wide awake in the manner of children for whom a bugle is still a thing worth being awake for, and she stands by the door a moment with her head tipped, listening to the sound travel on down the passage and grow fainter, carried to the next door, and the next, the whole deck waking to the same 6 bars in turn. "Wash your hands and face before we go," Ellen tells her, though there is not much washing to be done in a basin already used by 3 others and holding only a few inches of cooling water, so it amounts mostly to a damp cloth drawn once over each small face, briskly, the way a cat washes a kitten more from duty than from any real hope of thoroughness. Sean submits to it with his eyes shut and his mouth already halfway into a complaint that never quite finds the energy to become a proper one. Thomas checks his collar in the small mirror bolted above the wash-stand, tugs it straight, and declares them all with the particular mock solemnity he keeps for mornings, fit to be seen by the whole of New York, should New York happen to be waiting for them just outside the door. It is not, of course. What waits outside the door is the alleyway, painted the same clean white as the cabin, lit by its own small bulbs at intervals along the ceiling, and already filling with other families doing exactly what the Mullins are doing, emerging half-dressed and half-awake, calling to children, buttoning the last button, a woman 2 doors down laughing at something her husband has said, a baby somewhere further off giving a short experimental cry before subsiding again. The corridor smells of the same fresh paint as the cabin, and under it now, the first thin thread of something else, warm and yeasty, drifting up from below. Bread, she thinks, and something frying, and her stomach answers before her mind has properly finished the thought. They go down by the stairway near their own alleyway, Thomas first with Shian's hand folded into his, then Bridgie, then Ellen last. And the stairs themselves are a thing Bridgie has not tired of yet. Iron treads painted white, a stout handrail at a height exactly wrong for a child of 9 and exactly right for gripping with both hands and swinging slightly on regardless. The ship rolls so gently this morning that Ellen only notices it in the gibe of the rail under her own hand, a small firm sway and return, and Bridgie times her steps to it without seeming to notice she is doing so at all, the way a child's body learns a rhythm faster and more completely than any grown mind manages to. Down another level, the smell of breakfast has thickened into something unmistakable. Porridge, and the sharper tang of fish, and tea, strong and dark, and under all of it, the particular warm smell of a room full of people freshly risen and hungry. The dining saloon opens before them wide and bright, longer than any room Ellen has ever eaten in, its tables running the length of it in white-clothed rows, bolted benches drawn up to each, the whole space lit by electric bulbs set along the ceiling, so that even this far down in the ship, this far from any window, the room holds a clean, flat daylight of its own that owes nothing to the sun. They find places at one of the long tables, squeezed in among strangers who are strangers only for the length of a meal or two more, Ellen judges, before this ship makes them something closer to neighbors. Across from them, a young man with sandy hair and the accent of somewhere further north than Mayo nods a good morning and goes back to buttering a thick slice of bread. Beside Bridgie, a woman with a baby on her lap juggles the child with one arm and her tea with the other, managing both with the unhurried competence of a mother, several children into the business of managing things one-armed. A steward comes along the table with a great enamel jug held in both hands, filling cups with tea before anyone has properly asked for it, and behind him another carries porridge in a wide pot, ladling it into bowls set down the table's length, the oats thick and pale and steaming, a jug of milk following after for whoever wants it poured over. Sean eats his the way he eats most things put in front of him lately, with total concentration and a complete disregard for the spoon's proper use. And Ellen lets it go this once, this morning, in this room, because there will be a whole ocean of other mornings to correct him in. There is more besides the porridge, smoked herring laid out on long plates, the skin gone dark and glossy where it has been cooked, and ham cut thick alongside eggs fried soft, and a basket of fresh bread going round from hand to hand with a crock of butter and another of marmalade following behind it, orange and glinting under the electric light. Thomas takes a herring and picks at it slowly, working the flesh from the fine bones with the patient care of a man raised somewhere the sea, or at least a lake, had always put fish on the table one way or another, and he pushes a boned piece onto Bridgie's plate without being asked, because she has never yet managed the bones herself, and he has long since stopped expecting her to learn this particular week. Ellen eats less than she might, distracted by the room itself, by the noise of it. A good noise, she thinks, cheerful, dozens of conversations laid over each other in accents she is already starting to sort by ear. Soft West of Ireland vowels next to something clipped, and English 2 tables over, and further off, still a language she cannot place at all, northern in its sound, Swedish perhaps, or something near it, the words tumbling quick and bright, between a family with hair so fair it looks almost white under the electric light. Nobody minds the mixing of it. The room holds it all easily, the way the ship itself seems built to hold whatever is put inside it without strain. She spreads marmalade thin on a heel of bread and eats it slowly, watching Bridgie explain something to the sandy-haired young man across the table with the total confidence of a child who has decided, in the space of one meal, that a grown stranger is in fact a new friend. And the young man listens to her with the good humor of someone who either has younger sisters of his own at home or is simply glad, this far from home, of anyone at all to talk to. Thomas finishes his tea and looks, for a moment, entirely at ease, in a way Ellen has not seen on him in some weeks, not since before the leaving, not since the last days of packing and closing up and saying the goodbyes that had to be said, and she thinks, watching him, that the sea agrees with him better than she would have guessed a landsman's stomach could allow. By the time the meal winds down around them, plates and cups being cleared by stewards moving briskly between the long tables, the ship has properly woken beyond their own small corner of it, the whole vast third-class world of it stirring into its first full day since Queenstown. And Ellen sits a moment longer over the last of her tea, unhurried, feeling the engine's hum come up faint even through the floor of this room, patient and steady, carrying them all a little further west with every mouthful any of them takes. Afterward, they climb, the four of them, up through the white-painted stairways toward the open air, following the same drift of people that carried them down to breakfast, now reversing itself, everyone rising by ones and twos and families toward whatever light the morning has to offer. The air changes as they climb, the warm, close smell of the dining saloon giving way, deck by deck, to something cooler and cleaner, until they push out through a doorway onto the open deck aft, and the cold finds them all at once, bright and salt and moving, and Bridget gives a small, delighted gasp at the shock of it, the way she has every time this ship has let her outside since Queenstown. The morning is clear and pale, the sky a high, thin blue, with no cloud worth the name in it, and the sea lies out beyond the rail in long, low swells, dark blue going to gray where the light catches it wrong, unbroken in every direction as far as Ellen's eye can carry, which this morning, in this air, is a very long way indeed. There is no land anywhere. She has looked for it twice already since they woke, out of old habit, the way a person raised within sight of a hill keeps glancing for one, even where none has ever stood, and there is nothing now but water, moving and enormous and entirely unbothered by the ship crossing its surface. The wind is brisk enough that Ellen draws her shawl closer and settles it over her shoulders, though it carries no real bite to it, nothing like a Mayo wind off the bog in February, more a clean cold scrubbing than a cruelty, and she finds she likes it, likes the way it takes the last warm fog of sleep out of her head faster than any cup of tea is managed. It smells of salt, and of something colder and cleaner beneath the salt that she has no word for, only knows from these 2 mornings that it is a smell belonging entirely to the open sea and to nowhere she has ever stood before in her life. The deck itself hums the same way the cabin floor hums, though out here the sound has more company. The wind moving past the funnel somewhere far above, a rope creaking faintly where it is made fast to a stanchion. Gulls. Still, this far out, 3 or 4 of them wheeling and crying over the ship's wake as though they meant to follow it all the way to America out of simple curiosity. Thomas leans on the rail beside her, forearms crossed on the varnished wood, and watches the water go by beneath them with a particular stillness, of a man who has spent a great deal of his life watching weather and fields and has simply transferred the habit, without any trouble at all, onto watching the sea. Bridgie and Shian do not linger at the rail. There is a whole crowd of children already out on the open deck this morning, running its length in loose shifting packs, and within a minute Bridgie has fallen in with two girls near her own age, sisters by the look of them, dark-haired and quick-footed, and the three of them are away down the deck at a run, dodging round a knot of standing men, Bridgie's laugh carrying back on the wind before the group of them is even properly out of sight. Sean trails after at his own shorter stride, determined not to be left behind by his sister on principle, though he has to stop twice to catch his breath, hands on his knees, before setting off again. "Let them run," Thomas says, when Ellen half rises to call Sean back nearer. "There's nowhere on this whole ship for a child to come to harm that 100 grown people wouldn't see first, and the deck's wide, and the rail's high, and he's steadier on his feet than you're giving him credit for." She settles back, not entirely convinced, but willing, this once, to let her husband's easier nature carry the point, and watches instead, from the rail, the whole moving scene of the deck. Children at their games, a group of young men pitching quoits somewhere further along with a great deal of shouting over near misses, older men standing in 2s and 3s with pipes going, the smoke torn away sideways almost as soon as it leaves the bowl, women gathered in their own loose clusters along the rail or seated on benches with knitting or mending in their laps, taking the sun where the ship's own bulk breaks the worst of the wind. A steward passes along the deck, checking that all is as it should be, touching his cap to the women he passes, and further off, Ellen can see, through an open doorway, the general room where some of last night's card players have evidently taken up their game again this morning. A table of men bent over their hands, with the serious, quiet concentration of a business being conducted. It is a fine room, she thinks, pine-paneled and plain and comfortable, benches enough for everyone, and last evening she and Thomas had sat there an hour after supper, listening to a fiddle and a melodeon, strike up between them, and a good part of the deck's young people dancing to it on the bare boards, breathless and laughing, until the children had begun to droop where they sat, and it had seemed the kinder thing to carry them off to bed. She thinks of it now, watching the deck, and finds herself already looking forward to whatever this evening brings in the same room, the way a person back home might look forward to a fair or a wake for the company of it more than for any particular thing that happens there. There is something in being among so many people, all bound for the same unknown place, that makes strangers into something warmer than strangers within a day or two. She has noticed the ordinary caution people carry at home dropped somewhere back at the dockside, along with whatever else could not be fitted into the trunks. Thomas leaves her at the rail a while to go and stand with the group of men near the well-deck's forward end, and she watches him go, watches the ease with which he falls into their talk, a big, fair-haired man from somewhere near Athlone doing most of the talking. Something about a farm outside Philadelphia that a cousin of his has already got established. Good land, he's saying, and no landlord standing over a man's shoulder, counting what he grows. Thomas listens with his arms folded and his head tipped, taking it in the careful way he takes in most things, weighing it, and Ellen knows without needing to hear the rest of it that he will turn this conversation over in his mind for days, the way he turns over most things worth knowing. She herself takes the empty end of a bench near two other women, one of them with mending already spread in her lap, a boy's shirt with a seam gone at the shoulder, and falls easily into the kind of talk that women who will share a ship for a week soon learn to have. Where from, where bound, who's waiting on the other side. The woman with the mending is from Clare, going out to a married sister in Boston. The other, younger, unmarried, traveling with an uncle 2 benches down, bound for Chicago, and a place in a hotel kitchen already arranged for her by a cousin gone out the year before. They speak of small things mostly, the food, better than any of them expected, the cabin so clean it shames a body to leave so much as a stray hairpin lying about, the strange lightness of having, for these few days at least, nothing whatsoever that must be done. Ellen has brought no mending of her own out today, only sits with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the sun, where it breaks weakly through the high, thin cloud, and lets herself for a while do nothing at all, which is itself so unfamiliar an occupation that she has to remind herself twice that no pot wants watching, no hens want feeding, no floor wants sweeping, that for the length of this crossing the whole of her day belongs to no one's asking but her own. Down the deck, Bridgie's laugh rises again over the general noise, and further off, Shion has found a length of rope someone has coiled against a stanchion and is engaged in some private serious business with it that only he understands, and the ship goes on, steady under all of them, carrying the whole loose scattered gathering of them west across a sea that this morning shows no more temper than a mill pond. The bugle finds them again a little before noon, the same brassy 6 or 8 bars carried out onto the open deck this time rather than along an alleyway, thinned by the wind but recognizable at once, and there is a general drifting toward the stairways all along the rail, men knocking pipes out against the heel of a boot, women folding mending back into baskets, children rounded up out of their games with the particular reluctance children bring to being rounded up from anything. Bridgie comes back flushed and wind-tangled, her hair come loose from its ribbon on one side, and reports, breathless, that the dark-haired sisters are called Delia and Noni, and that Noni can turn a cartwheel and has promised to teach her before New York. And Ellen readies the ribbon while they walk, more out of habit than any real hope it will survive the afternoon. The dining saloon is fuller and louder at midday than it was at breakfast. The whole of third class seemingly arrived at once, and the smell reaching them on the stairs down is heavier now, meat and gravy, and the good dense smell of a proper dinner rather than a morning meal, and Ellen's stomach, after a morning in that wind, answers it eagerly. They find places again, not the same seats as before, but near enough, and this time it is soup that comes round first, a good thick barley broth, hot enough that Shion burns his tongue on the first spoonful and has to be coaxed into blowing across it before the second. After the soup comes the beef, sliced thick and dark at the edges where it has been well roasted, laid out with boiled potatoes still faintly steaming, and a gravy poured over both that Bridgie mops up afterward with a heel of bread until her plate shines. Thomas eats with the steady, unhurried appetite of a man who has spent the morning in wind and salt air and intends to do the meal full justice, and twice he passes an extra potato onto Sion's plate without a word, the way he has always done at home when there was a potato to spare, an old habit carried whole across the ocean along with everything else that fit in the trunks, and a good deal that did not need to. there is talk up and down the table of the morning just past, of the wind, of a game of cards someone lost badly at and is still being teased over, of a woman 2 seats along who swears she felt the ship's roll more sharply near the bow than aft, though nobody at this table has been forward to judge for themselves. The sandy-haired young man from breakfast is there again, further down, and lifts a hand to Bridgie when he catches her eye, and she waves back with her spoon still in her fist, unbothered by the etiquette of it. When the plum pudding comes round, dark and dense and studded through with fruit, a jug of sauce following after, Xian's whole attention narrows onto it with a focus he has given nothing else all day, and he eats it in small determined bites, saving, Ellen notices, the largest piece for last, the way he has always done with anything good enough to be worth saving. Bridgie finishes hers quickly and asks, with the boldness of a child who has already decided the answer will be yes, whether there might be pudding again tomorrow, and the woman across from them, the one with the baby, laughs and says she has heard there generally is most days, which pleases Bridgie enormously, as though she has secured some private promise from the ship itself. The meal winds down slowly, nobody in any great hurry to leave a warm room for whatever the afternoon holds, and Ellen sits a while longer over the last of her tea, while Thomas falls into talk again with the men nearby. The same unhurried talk of land and work, and what waits on the other side of the crossing, Philadelphia and Boston and Chicago and New York, traded back and forth across the table like so many familiar names from a story everyone aboard is already living some version of. She listens without joining much, content to let the sound of it wash over her, the particular music of a room full of people all hoping the same shape of hope, even where the details differ. Afterward, the afternoon settles into something quieter than the morning had been, the wind dropping a little as the day wears on, the sun climbing as high as it means to climb on an April day this far north, and holding there, pale and steady, throwing a low glitter across the sea's long swells. Ellen takes the children back up to the open deck for a while, though the games have thinned out now, most of the ship's children gone in to rest, or grown briefly tired of running, and she finds a bench in a sheltered corner out of the worst of the wind, and sits with Xian heavy and drowsy against her side, his eyelids fighting a battle they are plainly going to lose within the quarter hour. Bridgie, less inclined to sit still, drifts over to where a knot of women have gathered near the rail with some mending and a great deal of talk, and stands at the edge of it listening the way children do, half attending and half simply enjoying the sound of grown voices moving around her, until one of the women, amused, hands her a length of wool to hold taut between 2 fingers while it is wound into a ball, a small useful task that Bridgie takes to with tremendous seriousness, standing very still and very proud of the responsibility given her. Thomas has gone below for a while, drawn off by 2 of the men from dinner to see the smoking room, which he reports back on later, with the wonder of a man who has just walked through a room finer than any he expected to set foot in on this side of a landlord's house. Dark wood, he says, and leather seats, and a great many small windows of colored glass letting the light through in patches of red and green and gold, and a fire, a real fire, burning behind glass in a grate as though the room had been carried whole out of some gentleman's house and set down here in the middle of the ocean. He does not linger there long himself, feeling, he admits to Ellen with a small laugh, somewhat out of his depth among men in better coats than his own, though nobody had said a word to make him feel unwelcome and he comes back to the open deck, glad enough to find her and the children and the plainer, more familiar comfort of the bench and the wind and the wide, unbroken water. They walk a slow loop of the deck together before the afternoon light begins its long, unhurried decline. Sion roused enough now to walk between them, holding a hand of each, swinging a little on their arms with every second step, the way he has done since he first learned to walk at all, and Bridgie ranging ahead and doubling back, ahead and doubling back, unable to keep herself to any one pace for more than a minute together. The sea holds its calm the whole while, gray, blue, and vast, and entirely unbroken to the horizon in every direction, and somewhere far below their feet, patient and untiring, the engines go on with their long, steady work, carrying the four of them, and the whole moving small world of the ship around them, another few miles closer to whatever waits for them at the other end of it. The light begins to change well before the day is properly done with itself. The pale, high sun sliding down toward a horizon it will not reach for some while yet. The sea taking on by slow degrees a deeper color, less gray now, and more a true blue, going toward black at its furthest edge. The wind freshens a little, as it always seems to toward evening, and Ellen feels the cold reach in past her shawl at last, a cleaner, sharper cold than the mornings had been, enough that she gathers the children in and turns them back toward the stairways well before either of them thinks to complain of it. Below, the cabin holds a little of the day's warmth still, trapped between the steel walls, and she lets Bridgie and Sean rest a short while on their berths, more for her own sake than theirs, a small still half-hour in which nothing at all is asked of any of them, before the bugle's 6 or 8 bars come round again, nearer this time, sooner than seems possible, evening arriving the way it always does on a day spent mostly out of doors, faster than a body is quite ready for. Supper is a lighter meal than dinner had been, cold meat set out in thin slices alongside cheese and pickles, a great deal of buttered bread, and tea again, always tea, poured out steaming from the same tireless enamel jugs. Sean, worn thin by a full day of running and wind, eats without much appetite, more interested in leaning his head against his mother's arm between bites than in the meal itself, and Ellen does not press him, knowing a tired child eats what he eats, and no threats or coaxing will improve on it much. Bridgie, by contrast, seems to have found some second store of energy from somewhere, and eats quickly, restlessly, glancing more than once toward the doorway that leads through to the general room, where she can already hear, faint under the clatter of the saloon itself, the first notes of a fiddle being tuned. They are not long finishing before Thomas, catching the same sound, suggests they go through, and there is no need to ask Bridgie twice. The general room is filling already by the time they arrive, benches along the walls taken up first by the older women and by mothers with small children settled against them, the open floor left clear in the middle for whatever the evening decides to make of it. The room is plain and warm, pine-paneled walls holding in the light of its own electric bulbs, and it carries none of the hushed, careful grandeur Thomas described of the smoking room earlier. This is a room built for exactly this, for an evening with nothing much required of anyone beyond showing up. The fiddler is a thin, dark-haired man Ellen does not know by name. Traveling, someone beside her says, with 2 grown sons bound for a mine in Pennsylvania, and beside him a broader man works a melodeon with the loose, easy competence of someone who has played it at every wedding and wake within a day's walk of wherever he is from. They start slow, feeling the room out the way musicians do before a crowd has properly settled, a lament of some kind that Ellen half recognizes without being able to name it, something that might have been sung in Irish once before it wandered into a fiddle's keeping, and the room quiets to listen, even the children stilling a moment, caught by the particular gravity a slow tune carries when it is played well. It does not stay slow for long. The melodeon finds a livelier thread under the fiddle's line and pulls the whole room after it, and within a few bars the tune has turned into something with a proper beat to it, and 2 or 3 of the younger men are already up and clapping, and a space opens on the floor almost of its own accord, the way it always does when a room decides, all together and without a word spoken, that dancing is about to happen. Bridgie is off Ellen's knee and into the thick of it, almost before the decision is properly made, pulling Noni and Delia with her, the 3 of them attempting something between them that owes more to enthusiasm than to any real knowledge of the steps, and nobody in the room seems to mind in the least. Thomas claps along at first, seated beside Ellen, with Sion drooping heavier and heavier against his other side, and then, when the tune turns again into something even the least willing feet find hard to sit still through, he takes Ellen's hand and pulls her up, despite her half-hearted protest that she is out of practice, that it has been years, that her good skirt was never meant for this kind of business. She goes anyway, laughing despite herself, because a fiddle played well in a warm room full of people leaves very little room for genuine refusal, and Thomas, whatever else may have grown rusty in 9 years of marriage and farm work, has not lost the easy sureness of foot. He had the very first night she ever danced with him, a long while ago now, at a crossroads dance outside Castlebar, neither of them has forgotten. The dance does not demand much skill, only willingness, a simple turning figure that the whole floor falls into together, hands changing partners down the line and back, and for a few minutes Ellen loses the day entirely into the rhythm of it, into the fiddle's line rising and the melodeon steady chest under it, into the warmth of the room and the good tiredness in her own legs, and the sound, everywhere around her, of people laughing at their own missteps and each other's. Somewhere in the turning she catches sight of Bridgie again, breathless and pink-cheeked, being spun gently by the sandy-haired young man from breakfast, who has evidently appointed himself, for this evening at least, a kind of honorary elder brother to half the ship's children. When the tune finally winds down, breathless applause rising to meet its last note, Ellen finds her own place back on the bench, glad enough to sit, her heart going fast in a way it has not gone in some time, and Thomas settles beside her with the loose, contented look of a man who has just remembered something good about himself he had half forgotten under weeks of packing crates and closing accounts and saying goodbyes. Sean has slept through the whole of it somehow, curled now full length along the bench with his head in his mother's lap, entirely undisturbed by fiddle or melodeon or the thump of feet on the boards a few yards off. The evening goes on a while longer in that same easy way, a slower song following the fast one, an older man near the door singing alone for a verse or two, in a voice gone thin with age, but true enough in its pitch, the room quieting again to hear him out, and then the fiddle and melodeon taking it up together for the chorus, half the room joining in on words Ellen finds she knows without remembering learning them, carried somewhere in her from childhood, the way certain songs always are. She sings along softly, more for the pleasure of the sound in her own chest than for any wish to be heard, and beside her Thomas hums the tune under his breath, not quite trusting himself with the words. By the time the general room begins to thin, the hour grown later than any of them meant to let it grow, Bridgie has finally run herself down to nothing, flushed and heavy-limbed, protesting through a yawn that she is not tired in the least, even as her eyes fight to stay open. And Thomas gathers Sheon up against one shoulder, the boy barely stirring, while Ellen takes Bridgie's hand and steers her, still half arguing her own wakefulness, toward the doorway in the corridor beyond. They step out onto the open deck for a moment before going below. Thomas's idea, a last breath of air before the cabin's closer warmth, and the night meets them there entirely changed from the day. The sky gone properly dark now, and crowded with more stars than Ellen has ever in her life seen gathered in one place at once. No town's lamps anywhere near enough to dim them, the whole black dome of it strung thick with points of light from one edge of the sea to the other. The air is sharply cold, cleaner even than the mornings had been, and utterly still where the ship's own bulk breaks the wind, and the sea beyond the rail lies dark and glassy and calm, giving back a faint scatter of starlight along its surface with each slow, unhurried swell. Bridgie, roused a little by the cold and the sight of it, tips her head back against her mother's arm and says, in the drowsy, definite voice of a child stating a plain fact, that she has never seen so many stars, not even at home, not even in winter, and Ellen, looking up herself, allows that she has not either. They do not stay out long, the cold too sharp for lingering with a sleeping boy in his father's arms, and they go below by the now familiar white-painted stairways, down past alleyways where other families are making the same slow drift toward their own doors. Murmured good nights passed between strangers who are, by this second evening, beginning to feel rather less like strangers. Their own cabin holds its remembered warmth, the small bulb clicking on at Thomas's touch, and the business of settling 3 of them for sleep goes quickly now, practiced already after only 2 nights of it. Sean laid into his berth, still mostly asleep. Bridgie undressed and into her nightclothes with only the barest cooperation from her own drooping eyelids, tucked in beside her brother under the shared blanket, with a murmured protest that trails off into nothing before it is finished. Ellen and Thomas, undressed by the low light in the particular companionable quiet of 2 people at the end of a long, good day, neither needing to fill the silence with anything more than what is already there. The engine's hum has not paused once, not for a moment, the whole day through, and now, in the quiet of the cabin, with the children breathing slow and even across the small space, it seems to Ellen less like a sound at all, and more like the steady work of something patient and enormous, carrying them all safely onward while they rest, mile by unfelt mile, the whole ship leaning gently, gently into the calm, dark sea. Thomas climbs to the upper berth, and she hears him settle, hears the frame take his weight with a small final creak, and then his breathing lengthens and slows within a few minutes, the sound of a tired man, glad of a soft bed. Ellen lies a while longer with her eyes open in the dark, listening to it all together, the hum beneath her, the children's breath across the room, her husband's breath above her, and further off, faint and constant, the sea moving along the hull the way it has moved along it all day and will go on moving along it all night, patient, unhurried, indifferent to anything so small as sleep. She thinks, before the thought can properly finish itself, of tomorrow, of Bridget's cartwheel lesson still owed, of another bugle waiting somewhere down the corridor, of the coming hours to call them all again to breakfast, and then the thought softens at its edges and loses its shape entirely, and the hum carries her down after the others into a sleep as calm and unbroken as the sea outside the porthole, and holds her there